So in this video, we're going to show you how you potentially may have a set of pre-approved port openings. One of the things that slows things down is the ordering of port openings, because in many organizations that is a highly manual task. But what if we can have our NSX installation and vRA to work together so that we can potentially create a set of use cases where we can have the consumer to do the port opening under certain conditions. So what we will do is we'll now demonstrate how you potentially may do that by giving you one example of how we can open up from internet while still have a total isolation of the deployment. So going to NSX GUI, let's start in the inventory tab and let's just have a look at our virtual machines. We look at the virtual machine front ends, or the front ends in the deployment, maybe I should say, and we can see that it has a set of security tags. And one of the things we are at present is the ingress local tag. And then we have a bunch of services. We also have the deployment name, TP1 in this example. So as of right now, we have a bunch of security policies that kicks in. Let's start under environment. We have the isolate deployment that uses the deployment name for isolating the deployment. We have the ingress of ingress local. So as of right now, we are allowing ingress into the deployment from the local subnets. But what we would like to do here in this example, and note again that this is just an example of how you may do things, is that we are defining everything that is local. So if I go to inventory, I go to groups, and let's just have a brief look at a security group that I have created that is called local subnets. Let's just open that one up and see what that does. So here we go. The security group local subnets contains 3 IP ranges. So I've made myself make life easy for myself. So what I did was that I chose all of the private subnets that potentially are in use in our local data centers. So this is the 1918 local address definition. But it might be something else. This is something that are your IP subnets that you are using locally in your data center, and also maybe potentially in your physical infrastructure. All right, let's cancel this one out. And what we need, or the way we do it in this example, is that what we would like to have under the distributed firewall environment isolate deployment is an isolation security rule that isolates anything in outgoing direction. Because if we let our consumer let traffic in, then maybe we would like to isolate the deployment in a certain way in order to avoid any chance of lateral movement if something within the deployment gets infected. So Lars, take it from here and show what your scripts are doing.
So I have my deployment and I want to change the ingress policy that Anders just talked about. So I'm selecting my front-end servers. Again, I have a custom day to action called change ingress policy, where I'm presented with a different ingress policy that I, as a consumer, are allowed to choose between. So in this case, I want to publish my front-end servers out on the internet. So I'm going to choose ingress policy internet. I'm hitting submit, and I'm going to do the same thing for my second front-end server. This will now kick off a workflow in the background and create the added firewall rules that Anders talked about earlier. We will see in NSX Manager, if I go into security, distributed firewall, environment, and isolate deployments, I've now added a TP1 isolate out. So I'm also filtering the outgoing traffic from my deployment. And I will be able to see in the inventory and virtual machine that my ingress policy has changed from local to internet. So this is done automatically, and it's done with a action that I'm running in Orchestrator in the background. This script will detect if the user chooses the ingress policy internet. I will trigger this action to create the firewall rules needed to furthermore isolate the deployment from the rest of my environment.
But Lars, in this example, we have allowed the consumer to open up and publish ports from internet in this example. But what happens if the user is doing that and gets some kind of infection and then change from internet to some other kind of ingress? What happens then?
So in this example, I have a function in my workflow that will verify if the ingress policy is already set to internet. And if it is, I will throw an exception stopping the user or stopping the workflow from being able to change from ingress policy internet. So basically, once you have chosen ingress policy internet, you are stuck with ingress policy internet. And of course, this could be done in other ways as well. Maybe showing this to the user already in the day to action. When you go in to change ingress policy, you could have something being triggered saying you have already chosen ingress policy internet and now you're stuck with internet as ingress policy. You will not be able to choose from this. You can have some information showing up as well that changing from internet ingress policy is not allowed.
So from an NSX point of view, there are a couple of security policies that play together here. So what we have is that we have tagged the ingress VMs with the ingress internet tag. That means that if traffic comes from outside going towards someone that has the ingress internet tag, we will do a jump to application. Other than that, everyone within that deployment is isolated because of this negative blocking rule. So the ingress is allowed from internet, and the ingress service we find under application, depending on what service tag the consumer have chosen, HTTP and HTTPS in our example. But in order for us to avoid any lateral movement of potential bad stuff that has entered this deployment, what we did was we added this rule here. But this is not in ingress direction. This is in outgoing direction. So the rule says if the source is anyone in TP1 going to outside of any of the local network, that is allowed. And this is only in outgoing direction. So if someone within TP1 gets an infection and tries to do stuff in outgoing direction, then what happens is that we will actually hit the default rule, and the default rule in this particular example is reject. Note again that this is just an example. What we have shown is that we can have the consumer to influence what service port the consumer would like to have open to the deployment, and also from where stuff within the deployment may be reached. But me, being the security administrator of the environment, I will then, in this example, exclude any access towards anything that is local, just to be cautious. So again, it's just an example on how you can create the possibility to have pre-defined port openings from untrusted sources, such as internet.